Thank you, parrots, and welcome also to Yibbeneh, the listeners of Yibbeneh. My Rebbe, Rabbi Green, has done years and years of counseling. And he always told us one thing. He said, most people know what their problems are. What they struggle with is what to do about their problems. I struggled with the following for many years, and that was throwing blessings out of my mouth. And I worked on it. I tried every Elul in particular. I said, okay, it's time to step it up and, do the brachos more properly. I mean, there are 100 of them. It's not an easy task. And I did make some progress. In fact, one Elul, we dedicated an entire VOD to working on this, okay? Progress was made, but I was still stuck. But this is a lesson that I always want to repeat, that when you care about something and you add some prayer to it, when you have care and prayer, usually Hashem will come through and give you some siyata shmaya. And as many of you know, this whole foundation, foundation came about because I found a book called Kasher Tziva Hashem, Rabbi Daniel Garfinkel. It's now in English, by the way. I found this sefer, and I realized something. I realized that the reason I was stuck is because I was unaware of a halacha. And that halacha is that mitzvah tzrichas kavanah. And once I accepted upon myself to work on that, unbelievable, thank God. And I try to spread it far and wide, and I'm touched and thrilled by the reactions. Everyone's like, wow. So I would love to just, at this point say, and then I lived happily ever after with Hashem. That wasn't the case. And that's what tonight's shir is going to be about. We're going to discuss what I often call new technology. I want to introduce you to something called the Kavanah formula. And the truth is, it takes many of the principles we've been learning over the past period and puts them into a step-by-step, 3 steps for now, 3-step process. But before I do that, before I share this principle for you, we have to understand, why would you need a Kavanah formula? Isn't it enough to observe the halacha like I decided to, and you'll be happy ever after? So let's see why we need a Kavanah formula. Oops, wait. Sneak preview, wrong position. Let's start the story where it begins. Rote eats the mitzvah. This was me before KLM, okay? And the problem was, as we know, that if you don't have kavanah, it's a big deal. Let me explain. Yeah, I mean, I, as many of us, was not aware that the halacha is mitzvahs do indeed require kavanah, etc. So let's hear what the Kaf HaChaim brings. He brings the Arizal, and the Arizal says the following. He says he says that the mitzvah you do, the Maisa mitzvah, the physical act, and I'm including the speech, the prayer, that's like a goof. And the makshava, the thinking you invest into the mitzvah, that's the neshama. And then he says it straight. He says, a mitzvah without kavanah is like a goof without a neshama. And that's, the light bulb went on. I realized, there, my brachas, they're missing some life. They don't have life. The life was sapped out of them. That's the issue. Rote will eat the mitzvah. So and I think everybody can testify from their own experience that they understand the truth of this. Okay, so this what you're looking at right now is pre-KLM, and then dun 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 dun. Kavanah revives the mitzvah. That's what happened, right? And again, I'm happy to say that it's not just me. I'll say, do you realize that what you're doing right now is a mitzvah? And if you have kavanah for it, it can't be calculated. The difference of reward you receive, and you'll start thinking about it. Kavanah revved it up. Right. So that and by the way, it makes perfect sense according to the Arizal. What did the Arizal say? He says that the makshava is the neshama of the mitzvah. Right. So when you realize that when you add kavanah, you start thinking about it. Yes. And this is also, let's discuss this. Let's really spell this out. OK. What is it that how does the light bulb turn on when you even just have kavanah for the mitzvah you're doing? It's because you start to think more, right? So thinking, we underestimate. We look at it as, it's intellectual. It's merely intellectual. Well, that's not how the Torah looks at it. The Torah says that, do you know where your neshama is? Your neshama, give me 1 second. Let me reshare. Okay. Your neshama is in your brain. Okay. So thinking, we really need to reframe here. We have to realize thinking alone is super spiritual, right? You hear that the Rambam says that your tselem Elohim, your divine image, is your mind, right? So that's why Kavanah revives the mitzvah. So you would be expecting me to say, and then we lived on happily ever after with Hashem, right? I'm thinking before I do the mitzvah. So what more do I need? So let me show you the next phase. And I think the senior members of KLM will understand this. The plot thickens. Rote eats the kavanah and the mitzvah, not just the mitzvah. Rote can eat the kavanah you have beforehand. In other words, let's say right now, let's do it, by the way. Let's have in mind the mitzvah of learning Torah, kasher tziva Hashem. So you have that kavanah, and if you haven't thought to be aware that you're doing the mitzvah of learning right now and then have kavanah, that's going to spark something in you. But what if you just become accustomed, and now every time you hear a KLM shir, or you listen to a Devar Torah, or you read a Devar Torah, you have in mind doing the mitzvah of learning Torah. So what happens is it doesn't feel the same. You don't get the same spark and excitement from it. Why? Because that's become rote. So this was the problem, okay? However, and I can't stress this enough, There's a huge difference to doing a mitzvah without its neshama, without having that pre-kavanah. There's a huge difference. If you add the kavanah, and even if you don't feel anything when you have in mind learning Torah, or when you smile and say good morning, you have in mind a haftarecha kamocha, and when you walk into a beit knesset, you have in mind mikdashi teru, reverence for the sanctuary. So when you do that, even if you don't feel anything, your mitzvah has moved from bidi eved to lichatchila. You're doing it in the ideal way. You have the neshama there. You just don't feel the same thing. And it's, again, rote is not great for our connection to Hashem. So even though kavanah and the mitzvah, even if it becomes rote, you're in outstanding shape, we need to go farther. Because after all, what are we here for? We're here to get a deep connection to Hashem and to always feel alive, okay? So the question is, what do we do about it, right? How do you deal with the fact that rote, let's face it, rote consumes, the original metaphor, we went with the Pac-Man metaphor here, the original metaphor but I just thought, I'm a little bit of a senior here. I don't know if everyone heard of that film, The Blob. So there was this gelatinous monster that just basically absorbed everything in its path. And that is indeed what happens. Rote is this monster, this spiritual monster, if you will. Rote has a good side, but that's not what we're focused on, not how we mean it. Rote is this monster that just absorbs everything you do, right? So it sounds like we're just dead in our tracks, that we're just not going to get out of this, okay? Sounds bad, right? However, let me cheer you up a little, and I want to say there's hope, okay? First is understanding the opportunity within this problem. That's number one. And number two is the Kavanah formula that we're going to discuss and release tonight, okay? The problem, the opportunity. So the truth of the matter is, rote is always going to be present on some level, but because Hashem wants you to have a choice. Are you going to be alive in this moment, or are you going to be mechanical and robotic? Every moment needs the potential for rote so that you can fulfill the mitzvah deraisa of Bachar to B'chaim, choosing life. In other words, physically, Baruch Hashem B'li Hara Ad Me'esrim for everybody, but spiritually, it's in your hands. And yes, indeed, the Torah involves a lot of repetition, right? So we're going to see the rote monster is going to rear his head, but you have a chance. That means you get to choose, am I going to be alive every moment? And when you make the choice in the right direction, have in mind the mitzvah of Bachar to B'chaim. So first, number one is the fact that rote even eats the kavanah, not just the mitzvah. That is what our life's about. We're going to be facing this all the time, and that's where we can choose life. So that's number one. But I also want to help us, and that is I want to bring, this is something that worked on for like half a year at least, and want to present an angle on, and again, we have to deal with the problem or understand how the formula works, because in theory, everything is consumed by the rote man. Rote man. So we're going to see that there's something about this formula that helps us put up a good fight. And before I show you the formula, I want to tell you what the formula is based on, right? The source of this. Basically, the ideas that it's a three-step process. It all is based on perhaps one of the greatest, certainly one of the greatest Musar Sfarim of all time, and that's Mesilas Yesharim. The Ramchal was a very present, conscious angel that was sent to us. So I want you to know that's the basis of the Kavanah formula. And now let's take a look. All right, okay. This was the point. We're going to see the formula in a second. The Kavanah formula, of course, with Hashem's help, can crush Rote. All right, that's what we see here. Now let's see the Kavanah formula. Okay, GMP. That's the new acronym. GMP, goal, mitzvah, presence of Hashem. Now, before we get into it, let me sort of take it one by one. What's my goal? That's the first thing in theory you ask. We'll discuss the best way to implement the Kavanah formula, but right now I want you to grasp the ideas. So there is a very famous non-Jewish thinker, Stephen Covey. He said this, begin with the end in mind. It's a great line with great importance. So Lahavdil Elef Abdallahs, he was preceded by the Ramchal, what is it, in the 1700s. The Ramchal says there, the opening of the book, after the amazing introduction comes the opening. Ma hovasu ba'olam. A person has to constantly think, what is my purpose of being here? And the actual, I'll read you the language of the Ramchal just to hear a subtle point. I know you're basically familiar with this. These are opening words of Messias Sharm. It's the Yesod of Hasidus, the foundation of piety, and the shorish of avoda shlema, and the root of like perfect avodas Hashem is, and I'm just going to read this, for a man to clarify and come to realize as a truth what his obligation is in the world, in his world. Ready? This is the part I want. And to what he needs to direct his gaze and his aspiration in everything he does. Ready? All the days of his life. The Ramchal is saying you should always have the goal of why we're here, what our purpose is, all the time. It should be informing you every part of your life. That we're going to use that for the Kavanah formula. So that's the first part, goal, G. Okay. Next part, the next two, they look like they're pure KLM, but the truth is it came from the Ramchal. In the Perek Yud Zion of Messias Yesharim, where he's talking about acquiring tahara, purity, what he means is a devotion and a pure, undistracted connection to Hashem. Don't we all want this? So he says, what does he say? This is so KLM-ish. He says, don't enter a mitzvah suddenly. Pitom, right? Don't just encounter the mitzvah. Don't just suddenly rush into the mitzvah. He says, you need to prepare yourself by, ready, asking yourself the following two questions. What you see now, let's look at and mitzvah. What mitzvah am I about to do? That's the first thing the Ramchal says. And then he says, before whom am I doing it? Those two questions, the Ramchal says, if you want purity of connection, that's what you do. So that's the overview. This is all based on the Messias Yesharim, but now let's put the KLM spin on it, okay? All right, so let's go down. We're going to talk about what's my goal in more depth in our next session. This may take a session or two because I want this to be our modus operandi, period, for our Avodas Hashem forever. Okay, we won't just be reading Messias Yesharim, we'll be living it. Okay, so we'll get back to goal in more depth later. The first thing I wanted you to see is that the Ramchal says the goal should be informing your every single day. Okay, now let's go to mitzvah. What mitzvah am I about to do? Okay, now, so this is what we've been practicing, KLM, right? And there's 2 points here. One is that, notice that I say Kasher Tziva Hashem. I want to add this to your have in mind. Like I'll say, have in mind the mitzvah of learning Torah. But let's add Kasher Tziva Hashem, as Hashem commanded me. Someone gave me a ride to the elections, a very big Talmud Chacham. So I was talking about KLM, and he made a great illustration of why it's important to add as Hashem command me, or the Kayim MITZVAH, to fulfill the mitzvah of my creator. So he says, if a person, this is a halachic idea, if a person borrowed 100 shekels from Ploni, and then he goes back and he hands the 100 shekels to Ploni, right? So he didn't fulfill the mitzvah of paying back the loan, because he might be just giving him a gift of 100 shekels. So he has to say, this is to pay my debt, to fulfill my obligation to return the money. You hear this? So when we learn Torah, I'm doing this as Hashem commanded to. We're making it crystal clear, Hashem, I'm doing this because it's a mitzvah. So I want you to start practicing adding Kasher Tziva Hashem as Hashem commanded. And then last and definitely not least is, in whose presence am I doing this? So look what we say. The instruction here is, if you have your goal in mind and you express your kavanah properly, you're in great shape. But here's the next thing. Yes, in whose presence am I right now? Right? So here's the reason this is so important, okay? Did anybody until now, unless you're maybe a meditator or something, has anybody until now in this year, we've been 25 minutes, has anybody been noticing that they're breathing? Probably not, right? Most people are until now. Just take a second. Everybody take a second, and now focus on the fact that you're breathing. I'll do it too. Okay, so noticing your breathing requires focus. Noticing that Hashem is present requires focus. It's the same way, lahavdil, okay? In other words, Hashem is present, right? But you have to notice it, right? So look at the instruction here. Draw into your awareness that you are in Hashem's presence. This is amazingly helpful for at least 2 reasons. Number one, you're fulfilling really 3 commandments. Shavisi Hashem, placing Hashem before me. Yiras Hashem, awareness that you're in His presence. And Anochi, Amunah, that you're in Hashem's presence. It's packed with mitzvahs. But really, when you bring Hashem into your mitzvah fulfillment, you will do the mitzvah better. Look, I've been working on this, and I can testify that that's the case. Okay, so let's review. Goal. What's my goal? Then the next question: what mitzvah am I about to do? And then, in whose presence am I doing this? So the question we have to understand is, why does this crush Rote? Okay, we said that Rote can consume even the kavanah you have for the mitzvah, and it becomes lifeless. So the reason this can is because you're asking yourself open-ended questions, and it reminds you that you have a choice of being present or not. Okay. In other words, you still have to choose to be engaged. But when you ask these questions, these are triggers. These are triggers to decide to invest, and they prompt you forward. For example, one of the goals is to be close to God. So if you embark on a mitzvah and you just clarify, my goal here is to be close to God, are you going to run through it mindlessly? Less likely, right? When you trigger yourself, that you're doing a mitzvah, and as Hashem commanded, less likely to run through it, and most importantly, when you're in the presence of Hashem. Okay, that's the formula. It's introduction number one. Now, I asked everybody to take something that you can make a blessing with. Okay, and we're gonna practice. This is practice number one of applying the Kavanah formula to our lives. Okay, I assume since we gave you an announcement, you have. Maybe I'll give you 20 seconds, 30 seconds to get it. Maybe I'll get something. I'll be right there. Of course I need to do this. Okay. So what we're going to do is, I mentioned to you before that my initial struggle was throwing blessings out of my mouth. And I think what we may do in the ensuing sessions is we're going to really also work on this idea of throwing blessings, because 100 times we're supposed to be doing it properly. So if you have your drink or your food, I'm going to just walk you through it and just basically express to yourself, right, to your true self. You hear this? When you ask these questions, you're also appealing to your true self. Okay? So I will model it, just follow suit. Okay? So I want to start with mitzvah. Yeah, I like GMP. Yeah, you can ask yourself, what's your GMP? But I think it starts best with first asking, what mitzvah am I about to do? Okay, so I am about, and by the way, there's endless depth. That's why we'll come back to these blessings. There are so many mitzvahs within the blessing itself, the drinking, etc. We're going to just simplify to begin with, but then we're going to expand. Okay, so what mitzvah am I about to do? I'm about to make a birkas nenim, a blessing for a pleasure I'm about to have, which is a mitzvah that the rabbis commanded me to do, which itself is a mitzvah d'oraisa, to listen to the rabbis. So I'm about to make this blessing to enjoy this pleasure. In whose presence am I? I'm in the presence of Hashem. What's my goal right now? To come closer to Hashem. Okay, everybody, make your blessing. We'll also talk about the mitzvahs of drinking next time. So try this at home. Let me give you a clear assignment, okay? One blessing. It would be wise to make it the first blessing you make in the morning, or when you have it. Let's say maybe you do the preparation for davening, but when you're ready to have your first glass of water, whatever it is, let's do the GMP. Okay, Hatzlacha.
Shakar, Rabbi, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Welcome. Hopefully it won't be a TV show.
Shaul, you're on mute.
Sorry.
Thank you for the reference to the 1980s with Pac-Man.
Very good.
Do we have time for comments?
For sure.
So, as you alluded to, I definitely saw Pac-Man eating Kavanah. I adopted quickly the 5 gems of Ava, Yira, Simcha, Bakarta B'chaim, and Sinai. And then I found myself, before I started learning, just, rattling them off quickly,
Right.
And so I saw that. Then I just want to say that, you said that even if you don't feel anything, thinking it's a mitzvah l'hatchila. You're definitely, and I just thought about like an analogy there, that if you leave your house in the morning and you have a habit of saying, I love you to your kids, or, to your wife, or even giving someone a peck on the cheek. There's a big difference. Even if you do it by rote, it still matters than if you don't do it at all, right?
Right.
Like if you just walk out the door and you don't say I love you, or you don't, even if you do it by rote, it's still something.
That's fantastic. Right, for sure. The person probably say, what happened? Why aren't, it's disappointing to the other. That's wonderful analogy.
Right. And something else you said, which about, whose presence are we in, right? So we're in a presence where Hashem is always there. We just have to notice it, right? Which reminds me of one of my absolute favorite Rabbi Greenisms, which is, it blew me away the first time I heard it, which he says, like, to apply it to this, he said, right now, this day, right? 3:30 or 4:30 in the afternoon, New York time, November 2nd, in the secular calendar, this is the greatest moment in the history of the universe. And you say, like, what? Now?
Beautiful.
Come on, how do you compare that to, Mamad Har Sinai, right? And he'd say, you think God creates any B- moments? Like, you think he sits there and says, okay, this moment's an A, this is a D, I'll make that a C+, because every moment is an A+. It's just, we don't plug in. And so that's what I think you were saying, that every moment can be stupendous, but we have to plug in, right? And that's
exactly.
That's what the formula does.
Right. And this also that, right. And just even note and to hear that, and I've seen it, when you, even if it's a you're not immediately going to start shaking when you say, I have in mind, I'm in the presence, oh, Hashem's here, and you faint from the profundity of the experience. It's not going to happen. But when you do it, when you draw your attention, you will act differently. And that's really what the Ramah brings the Mora Nevuch, the opening the Mishnah Berurah, is it says your movements in front of a king are not the same when you are not from the king. So exactly. So even a bit of awareness will have an impact. And most importantly, they're huge mitzvahs. When being aware that you're in the presence of Hashem, like I said, is 3 super mitzvahs.
When you quoted Steve Covey, and you said, but before Steve Covey, there was the Ramchal. I thought of even before the Ramchal, there were the tzaddikim who composed L'cha Dodi and said, Sof Maaseh B'machshava Tchila.
Very good.
Sof Maaseh B'machshava Tchila, right?
And beautiful. And before them was Hashem, because he's the one who had the makshava before the ma'aseh.
And to pick up on that, I thought of what we did. I just made the bracha on a glass of water, right? So I did a shahakol, and that made me think about it. We say that bracha so often. It may be our most common bracha, right? Shahakol niyeh b'dvaro. Now it's kaviyachol, but when Hashem, we know, created the world through his speech, but really, what was it? It was through his intention. It was just so when we're saying that bracha, we have a perfect sort of paradigm for how the power of intention.
Beautiful.
And so if we want a halacha b'drachav is right there.
Beautiful. What a wonderful insight into the Shal Call. Yes, we'll be hunkering in on it too. Beautiful. Yesher koach.
Thank you.
Okay, great. All right. Well, everybody, thanks so much for joining us for the new season. And please God, Hashem will give us Siyata Shmaya.
Shama shir shir